So they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be honest in order to trap him by what he said, so as to hand him over to the jurisdiction and authority of the governor. So they asked him, "Teacher, we know that you are right in what you say and teach, and you show deference to no one, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth. Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But he perceived their craftiness and said to them, "Show me a denarius. Whose head and whose title does it bear?" They said, "The emperor's." He said to them, "Then give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." And they were not able in the presence of the people to trap him by what he said, and being amazed by his answer, they became silent. In this is the gospel of Christ.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Give to God what is God's. Or as we heard, give to the emperor what is the emperor's. We possibly know the saying better as give to Caesar what is Caesar's. What does it mean? Sue? The division between church and state. So we owe obligations to the state and we owe different obligations to the church. Does that meet with your sense of what that means? Does anyone have a different view? David? Okay, so the material could be the preserve of the state, and the spiritual, the intangible, is for God. Yes. Richard, I'll come to you. Thank you. So you give to the state tax, but you give to God a tithe, which is also money, but given for the work of the church. And Richard?
I have a similar view. I think that it's been used a little bit more wider than it should be. I think it was more tightly referring to money and tax, and that's why he's drawing the coin.
Right. Okay, so it's particularly about money and specifically about tax. Fantastic. I was just going to offer one, which doesn't surprise this congregation, but great, thank you. So, yes, Andrew. Allegiance. Can you say some more about that?
Allegiance to the government.
Yes.
And also your allegiance to God.
Okay, so it's about, I think...
I don't know at all. It's about your feelings towards your commitment. What is your commitments to?
So to pick up both points, where your allegiance is, there your money will go. So I've put this, and I'm going to link war with paying taxes. And I hope you'll understand why as we go along. But I'm really raising the question, what allegiance do we owe to the state as Christian people? So in terms of taxes, I think most Christians, and I'm certainly one of them, would say paying taxes is incumbent on all as a way of contributing to the state and its welfare. I don't think that's a very controversial statement, but it's an important statement. We do owe to our nation a contribution to its welfare. Thank you, Andrew. Andrew just said, unless you're a multinational. But I think my point is underlined there, Andrew, because we see that as avoidance of appropriate responsibility. And so we should. Likewise, drawing a parallel, I think many would say, Christians included, that fighting wars is incumbent on all who are eligible by age and gender as a way of maintaining the integrity of the state. Now, I use the word gender because you know my area of specialty is World War I, and in World War I women did not fight. They do now. So many people would say we owe an allegiance to the state, and if the state goes to war, we are directed as a matter of allegiance to state, and many would add actually and to God, to follow the dictates of the state into war. I'm delighted, Kathleen. Kathleen doesn't agree, and you'll be surprised to hear neither do I. But I think it's a common view. Would you agree it's a common view? We might hope not, but it is a common view, and actually very common in the churches. I believe that as Christians, we are called upon to interrogate the culture and beliefs and practices of our society from the standpoint of the gospel. And I actually don't think we do it enough. But we are called upon to do that. Firstly, because our allegiance is to the gospel as the source of life. But secondly, because, sorry, I've jumped a point. The theory of the just war is one way of making the undesirable fact of war accountable to Christian values, and we'll talk about that more shortly. But I think we need to interrogate it. Can you see that? So it's two little ants, and it's up here, and one says to the other, nice sunrise. And can you see the picture below? What is it? It's a tennis ball. Things are not always as they seem. So everyone says, there's a sunrise. Someone comes along and says, it's a tennis ball. And do you know what happens to the person who says it's a tennis ball? They're called a heretic. But part of the gospel is a willingness to see beyond what everyone takes as normal, to interrogate it. You may come back to the same view, that's fine, but at least interrogate it and start thinking. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. We extract that text from its context. Did you hear in the reading that it was all about the religious leaders trying to trap Jesus? That's a clue that this saying may not mean what so many have said it does. Wedge politics is certainly not new. That's right, it's wedge politics. But we've lost that. In its day, when Jesus said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's," most Jews would have known exactly what he meant, because they owed Caesar nothing. Caesar was an invader. Caesar had deposed the rightful God-appointed rulers of the Jewish nation. And in Judaism, you owe God everything. So when Jesus says, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's," everyone would have said, "Nothing." And that was very controversial, because Caesar laid a tax on Israel as a subjugated state. It is non-violent resistance. And there's something rather cunning in this that you probably won't have picked up. Did you notice that he asked for a coin? And those who sought to entrap him had a coin, and it was a Roman coin. In the temple, you could not use Roman coinage because it had the head of Caesar on it, and therefore it was idolatrous. He's also showing them up as collaborators because they have the coin of the imperial oppressive power. So while I happen to agree that we owe allegiance to the state and we should pay tax, can you see that things are not always as they seem in relation to the obligations we owe to the state? And one of them, in most Christian thinking, is war. But things are not as they seem. Do you remember what I said last Sunday about the early Christian church? 300 years of pacifism. Christians refused to serve in the army. And if they were in the army, they sought to leave it. If they were ordered to kill, they refused, even at pain of their own death, because they were disobeying a direct order. So for 300 years, it was obvious to Christians that war could not be part of the behaviour or practice of a Christian. We've lost that. Why? Because in the year 312 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine fought a rival, Maxentius, at what is called the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. The Milvian Bridge still exists in Rome. He had a vision the night before the battle in which he saw a cross in the heavens and heard the words, "In this sign you will conquer." So legend has it that he got all his soldiers to wear crosses, and they won. Note in the picture, can you see the angels up there? One of them's got a sword. Can you see underneath the angels, that's Constantine. He's the man in gold, surrounded by light. And can you see that the Roman standards have crosses on them? I find that blasphemous. If you really believe that, you believe the Romans were right to execute Jesus. The sign of the cross is not a sign of military victory. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And yet that is the account. And most importantly, Constantine converted to Christianity on the strength of that experience and began the adoption of Christianity as the religion of the Roman Empire. And suddenly Christians found themselves embracing the state, whereas before they had stood apart from it and were effectively a counter-culture. Which? The cross in Jesus' time was a sign of utter degradation, humiliation and shame. Do you know, in the art of the early church, the cross does not appear for 200 years because they could not face it. As one biblical scholar has said, you know how a lot of people wear crosses around their necks? If we understood the deep meaning of it, we would wear an electric chair around our necks. But then this symbol of imperial power is used as a sign of God's blessing to beat an enemy in battle. Surprise, surprise, 100 years later, after Christianity is thoroughly embraced by the Roman Empire, Saint Augustine, a towering figure in Christian theology, develops the doctrine of the just war. When is war the answer? Please open your notice sheets. And it's the sheet which is at the back page called Just War Theory, and it lays out the conditions for a just war. Now, there's a bit of Latin there. Does anyone speak Latin? So it's... I should say read it, Richard, shouldn't I? It says jus ad bellum, which means justice moving towards war. And jus in bello means justice in the midst of war. So there are conditions set out for how you may declare a just war, and there are conditions set out for how you may conduct a just war. So war has now become a legitimate Christian enterprise within certain constraints. And that has been the practice of the Christian church for 1,700 years. Let me stop and ask for any questions or comments. Yes, Richard. Thank you. That the rules of war make war more palatable, and I think you could say the same thing about the just war theory. That it allows war to be palatable for Christians. That's a sceptical view. And let me be clear, I'm not impugning Augustine in what I'm saying. I'm offering you my own views. I can understand why he did it, but I regret it. Problems with a just war. This is Michael's view. Say some more, Kathleen. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. What about Gandhi? He practiced non-violent resistance for a long time and paid dearly, ultimately with his life. How do you mean, Ian? Oh, sorry, you're back to Bonhoeffer. We jumped to Gandhi, but you're right. Bonhoeffer actually was not a pacifist because he was thoroughly implicated in the July 20 plot to kill Adolf Hitler and paid for with his life for that. That's correct. Yes. Yes, and it's a big question. Okay, the problems I have with a just war. One, regardless of the principles that you say guide your conduct, once a war starts, it generates a momentum and violence of its own. And the issue is to win. Now, in World War II, that involved bombing German cities, civilian targets. Hamburg, 50,000 people were killed in one night. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And actually what was worse in Japan was the firebombing of Tokyo. Far more people were killed. Now that was considered reasonable to beat the enemy. But it actually directly contravenes one of the principles of the just war, which is, I'm just going to get the right word, discrimination. Non-combatants should not be directly or intentionally attacked. They were. Yes. Yes, I agree. Agreed. It's a multi-layered issue and I'm really only touching on it, but I'm trying to hold up some of the issues I think we need to reflect on. So one, war leads to violence. And once it's unleashed, a principle doesn't stop it. My bigger problem with it as a Christian is that while church and state are separate, what the just war theory has tended to mean in practice, if not in intent, is that churches end up blessing war. Once again, my area, the First World War. The Protestant churches, our churches, were absolutely, unequivocally committed to the prosecution of the First World War. They saw it as a chance to bring renewal, to wean people away from drinking, from gambling on the horses, from material things. In the first week after the war was declared, churches were full. Do you know how long that lasted? About 2 weeks. And I quoted in my blog this week, we spoke last week about Pope Benedict XV, who made many peace proposals during the First World War. They were all ignored. Pope Benedict asked, even at the Treaty of Versailles, that we be more magnanimous. I discovered in my research that Britain signed a secret treaty called the Treaty of London, 1915, which excluded the Pope from any peace negotiations. And in 1917, when he made a particular proposal, this is what the Bishop of Birmingham said in response. So the argument is hundreds of thousands of our young men have died. The best way to honour them is to throw more into battle. Up until 2011, the chaplain at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, where the Strategic American Air Force Command is located, i.e. that drops nuclear bombs, taught the pilots the just war theory and said it is ordained by God that it's correct to drop nuclear bombs on our enemies. That happened up until 2011, just 5 years ago. Once you have an understanding that war is okay, it takes on a momentum of its own and it goes to dark places. Here's a little cartoon for you from Lunig. Father, what's the difference between a just war and just a war? A just war is one which is being planned, and just a war is one which has already happened. Where does this leave you? This is the legacy and inheritance we have as Christians. This is the weight of tradition. It's caught up in that cry for God, King and country. It's apparent to everyone they are the same thing. I beg to differ, but I'm standing against 1700 years of Christian belief and practice. By the way, I'm actually not entirely a pacifist. I think Bonhoeffer did the right thing, but I don't think I would have had the courage. But to be fair to him, he wasn't prosecuting a war. He was engaged in potential violence, but he wasn't propagating a war. So I think there are some conditions where violence may be required. but I worry about the just war theory because of where it has led us. And that image of Jesus in front of the atomic holocaust, that is blasphemous. And yet it's what's informed our thinking. Someone said to me the other day when I told them I was engaged in peace studies, "Well, Michael, you've just got to accept that war's a fact." And I feel the power of that view because in some sense it's undeniable. But I think what's not being said in that view is that if you are a person of faith and vision, you see the world differently and you have different hopes. And you engage your hopes with the culture and world in which we live. And people may call you a heretic, they may call you mad, they may say you're unrealistic, but I imagine they said similar things about Jesus. So the Word of God comes to us and interrogates us and searches deep into our hearts, minds and psyches and says there's another way. G.K. Chesterton famously said, "Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and not tried." If Christians tried to be ministers of peace, then I think the world would be on a different course. That involves standing against one part of our legacy and diving deeper into the gospel and saying, here we find a vision for life that is worth committing to and living. So may it be.